Biodiversity refers to the variety of species in an ecosystem, and it can be a measure of environmental health. However, we now know that our environment is in serious trouble. It might not be the traditional way to study ecology, but I want to start telling new stories about what's happening to life on Earth by shifting how we look at art. So it's with the relationship of art and biodiversity in mind that I started exploring the art collections here in Glasgow. Scientists tell us that the variety of bird life has dramatically reduced in the last 500 years. We've lost around 200 species completely as a result of habitat destruction, hunting, and other forms of human intervention. So I enlisted the help of a range of experts to assist me in uncovering a new story about the connections we can find between art and biodiversity in museum collections. And to my surprise, my hunt led me to a series of ostentatious European portraits where the sitters were adorned with feathers. Like this painting here by Anthony van Dyck. Most art historians would focus their attention on the human subject, but I'm more interested in something she is wearing. You're caught up in glimmers of brocade and translucent lace on the ruff. So take a closer look. Right up at the top, just behind this woman's face, which glows with light, is this shadowy background and this quite large ostrich feather. It actually reminds me quite a bit of what's happening nowadays, where animal lives are being pushed to the background. We barely even pay attention to them sometimes, and this is really a part of the problem that led to the biodiversity crisis, the idea that we're the center of everything. The human life is the most important life in this portrait. But how self-centered humans can be wasn't exactly a revelation. I knew there was more to this story. Well, we've been looking at a painting where the feather's really hard to see. And of course, now we're looking at a painting which is an entirely different matter. Do you think that the visitors at Kelvin Grove notice the feather as they look at this painting?
So this is a very Scottish portrait, but as you mentioned with the ostrich feather, which comes from Africa, this is very much about Scotland's pretensions to the world. I mean, this is an ambitious portrait. I think the detail pulls you in, and you want to go from, bottom all the way to the top, and then that ostrich feather hits you. I mean, I can't see how you would miss it, really. It's very much a part of the whole outfit, isn't it? It's the part of the ensemble. And it says also about Scotland's trade with the world as well.
With Africa. After seeing some examples of these decorative feathers, I wanted to learn more about the animals. So I reached out to Robin Haggard to tell me more. So we've been looking at paintings of people wearing ostrich feather headdresses, and now we're here with an ostrich. And as the curator of zoology, can you tell me about this animal?
Yeah, absolutely. This specimen here came to Glasgow Museums from Paisley Museums nearby in the 50s. In the wild, these birds live in dry, open areas like savannas. Sometimes they're nomadic, sometimes they live in really small groups, and they are the largest living bird. Ostrich feathers themselves are very distinctive because they're so fluffy. So if you look at this bird here, it's got fluffy open feathers, but if you imagine a duck, the individual barbs on each feather are sort of zip-locked together, making it very smooth. The ostrich doesn't have that zip-lock feature, and so they're very, very fluffy.
How would they be collected or gathered from these animals, say, around in the 1600s?
So in the 1600s, it was quite a dark practice. The ostriches would have to be hunted and then killed and then plucked for their feathers. When the demand for feathers got so high that they couldn't meet it, and the natural populations themselves started declining, Europeans cottoned on to the fact that they could farm ostriches. So they would set up huge farms for them. There were a lot in South Africa run by British colonialists, and they would then be able to cut the feathers or pluck the feathers every 6 to 8 months.
Was this the first time that you'd thought about the feathers in these portraits and these paintings? When you see these animals, do you see something quite different?
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't really noticed a lot of the feathers in these paintings. I've seen feather fans, ostrich fans, but not quite, despite the fact that I look after this collection, put the two together. So it's been a really interesting learning experience.
Yeah, for me too. The next stop on my hunt was the Glasgow Museum Resource Centre and its collection of incredible objects. So we're back in front of a portrait. This is a portrait from 1892, from the height really of the ostrich accessory craze. And when I started researching feathers in the collection, I got in touch with Jo, who we've spoken with before, and she said we just really had to look at this portrait, and I can see why. Jo, can you tell us more?
It is a stunning portrait. It shows Lady Ethel Mackay Simpson. And she's only 17 years old in this portrait. This is her coming out portrait. This is the time when she would have been presented at court. She was saying, "I'm eligible now for marriage." It's so opulent and extravagant. And the ostrich feather fan, which you can't miss, and just makes the whole outfit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You also see she's wearing an amazing diamond necklace.
Just stunning. You know, I was thinking of the fact that ostrich feathers by weight were worth as much as diamonds at the time.
And here she's got both.
And something that you rightly pointed out is just compositionally how huge that fan is. We've seen how large they actually were. We know that thousands of people were buying them. So this was a real booming economy, a good that spoke to the family's wealth, their connections to the colonial empire. But then if we take a step back, this is animal lives, a lot of animal lives, if you can imagine how many feathers this would have taken. And we just look at this in the context of visiting a gallery as a prop, as something that supplements that human in the center, when really there's a whole set of relationships and creatures that are on the periphery. So I'm at the Glasgow Museum Resource Centre still, but in a different part, looking at a different side of my portraits. You can see there's two ostrich feather fans right here. They're really remarkable. You get a sense of the size. I'm not allowed to touch them, but look, they're longer than my forearm, and you can really get a sense of how they would move and extend my body if I was able to hold them. So here we have a great crested grebe, and this was a species that can be found locally whose numbers plummeted because of the fashion trade. The ornate head plumes of this beautiful bird became a hallmark of elegant Victorian fashion. The great crested grebe performs a mesmerizing courtship dance in the early spring. And here in the UK, this natural spectacle was almost lost forever when the species was nearly wiped out. So we're also looking at a couple of really beautiful prints. They span the period that we're talking about. The first here is from 1829, and the later one is from 1913. So around the 1860s, things really picked up. You can see here that the feathers are brightly colored in the print, that this is going to appeal to the reader who's looking at this catalog, that's seeing the latest fashions, that's going to go out and try to purchase the thing that everyone else has. And this is what happened. This is how the boom industry of the feather trade really took off around this time. In print culture, prints, newspaper advertisements, magazines, this was all a huge part of that trade. So what you have then is this huge demand being generated for people buying more and more of these feather accessories, and that in turn impacted the populations of these animals and led to their decline. This intense period in the feather craze led to severe population decline, and for some species, even extinction. But this grim reality inspired people to fight to protect bird life in a way that had never been seen before. So I asked Sarah Jane Dunn at the RSPB to tell me more.
So can you tell us a bit about the way that biodiversity in terms of the fashion industry plays into the RSPB and its history, how it was founded?
So that's where we started from, actually. Emily Williamson founded the Society of Protection of Birds in 1889 because of the fashion industry. She was really frustrated that birds were becoming extinct because of the feather trade and the sort of really unsustainable practices that were going on that were sort of driving populations really sort of down. Things like the little egret and the great crested grebe and the bird of paradise were really sort of plummeting in numbers because of the demand for sort of women's feathers and hats.
So we've been here looking at paintings, historic paintings that depict feather accessories, and clearly these industries affected bird populations. How do you think that the paintings worked into that story?
Well, really, it's a bit like the sort of influencers of today. Those women were the sort of people that the sort of normal people idolised and wanted to be like. Actually, by being in paintings in accessible locations like museums, were sort of open to everybody and acted like the social media of the day. And it really sort of drove that sort of trade of feathers sort of really to an unsustainable level because everyone wanted to be like these people that they saw in the paintings.
I started this hunt for feathers looking at large portraits painted in the 1600s. However, as we've seen and heard, the cycle of human consumerism eventually increased to unsustainable levels in the 19th century. And the visual cultures that surrounded the feather fashion industry are not so different from the way that digital photos and social media fuel fast fashion today. So at this crucial time for nature, we have to start putting animal life back in the foreground.
We can make a powerful shift just by taking the time to really look at the wildlife all around us.